My name's Anders Furze. I'm the Program and Communications Coordinator at the Centre for Advancing Journalism at the University of Melbourne. Joining me here on this panel, we have Steph Harmon. Steph is founding and managing editor of Junkie, a politics, pop culture and comment site which publishes work from young journalists and writers around Australia. Prior to Junkie, Steph was the editor of music and arts street press The Brag and founding editor of arts and culture website Furze. She occasionally appears on ABC Radio, FBI Radio and The Project. Next to Steph, we have Sam Downing, who is a Sydney-based journalist and the editor of 9MSN Pickle and 9MSN Coach. These are two websites which launched earlier this year, April?
Correct.
Yep. Still relatively young. Pickle and Coach respectively cover viral/animal and diet/fitness news. After graduating with a Bachelor of Communications from the University of Newcastle, Sam has spent 10 years working in digital news, covering topics including breaking news, celebrity gossip, US politics, and of course, cat videos. Now, we're all no doubt aware of what happens when a major news brand attempts to capture the online youth market. The awkwardness of News Limited's Internet Action Force comes to mind. But 9MSN Pickle and Coach have some really cool features, and I'd like to talk to you particularly about the Australian Vintage Project and stuff like that.
Great.
Next to Sam, we have Tim Fisher, who is editorial director at Broadsheet Media. In the past decade, Tim has edited a range of websites and magazines for publishers including Architecture Media, News Corp and Morrison Media, where he became the longest-serving editor of Surfing Life magazine. He has worked in communications for non-profit organisations and taught online journalism at RMIT. His writing has appeared in The Age, Smith Journal, Triple J Magazine and elsewhere, and he's a board member of the Emerging Writers Festival. And on the end, we have Nick Melin. Nick is the current editor and you co-founded Spook?
Yes.
Yep. Spook Magazine, which is a cross-digital print publication centred around pop culture, politics, gender and the arts. During his time at Spook, Nick has managed the growth of the magazine from humble beginnings as a small blog to a printed publication that's today released across 37 countries and a digital platform. His short career has also involved working as a marketing consultant for Crave Agency and as media coordinator for the Environmental Film Festival Melbourne. And as someone who works on a title and with previous experience in both online and physical media, I'd be keen for your perspective on the different opportunities afforded by both kinds of platforms. To begin with, I've asked our panellists to just give us an overview of their publications, tell us what kind of stories they publish and who they think their audience is, and we'll go from there. So Steph, do you want to give us an overview of Junkie?
Yes, so Junkie launched in February 2013, so we are 2.5 years old now. We call ourselves a pop culture, politics and comment site, which kind of roughly summarises the kinds of stories that we publish. We have a pretty small team, which means that we tend not to break news, but we do a lot of comment and analysis, and a lot of that tends towards the funny side rather than the serious side, but we do have a lot of serious big stories that we do as well. And so we have a team of about 20 to 30 regular-ish freelancers, but we've published work from over 200 young writers around Australia. And we have a team of, it's myself, an assistant editor, a staff writer and a weekend editor now who are on staff. And in terms of our audience, we call ourselves a youth publication. Advertising-wise, they say to our advertisers that it is, I think, 18 to 35, which is a really broad sweep. We started off a bit younger, or pitched a bit younger, but it turned out really quickly that our audience was quite expansive.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Steph. What about you, Sam? And particularly, how do Coach and Pickle differ from, say, the 9MSN audience generally?
I guess in terms of how they differ from it generally, they're two brands. They grew, well, as you said, we launched them on April 1st, Pickle and Coach. And they grew out of, I guess, a rebranding of 9MSN's lifestyle offering as a whole. So, as you mentioned, Pickle is kind of more about the viral and animal side, which wasn't really a voice that 9MSN had before. Certainly we were doing that content, but it was kind of spread, I guess, kind of scattershot around the 90% network more broadly. And Coach, it was an extension of our old health brand, and we kind of narrowed it down to the more like diet and fitness, kind of more practical, everyday advice, because that's kind of just what we felt that the audience of 90% wanted. I think 90% as a whole is very much pitched towards just mainstream Australia. I know that sounds very vague, but that's just kind of what it is. Sure. And so that it's not so much, it's certainly not a youth media organisation or entity specifically, but there are definitely elements pitched towards that side of it within there.
Cool. Tim, what about you? How do you see Broadsheet operating in Melbourne? Is it a youth publication, do you think?
No, Broadsheet's a city guide, and we think of our audience as people who are interested in engaging with their city, and I guess mostly that's young people because they're more able to, they're less tied down by things like kids, and they've got maybe more disposable income because they don't have mortgages and whatnot. You go out more when you're young because you have more energy. So from that point of view, I guess we're a youthful publication, but we certainly don't think of ourselves as a youth publication, and audience surveys tell us our average, if there's a Broadsheet reader, she is in her early 30s, which I wouldn't necessarily classify as young. But as I said, Broadsheet is a city guide. We're currently in Melbourne and Sydney. We were founded in 2009, so been around for 6 years in Melbourne, and since 2011 in Sydney, and we're just about to launch in Adelaide, Brisbane and Perth. And we, as I said, we're for people who are interested in their city. We try and tell people, we try and help people experience the best of their cities. So we tell stories about the city, about people doing interesting things in their city. We're best known for, as you guys I'd imagine know, for telling you where to have breakfast on a Saturday morning and what bar has just opened for you to go out at 2 on a Friday night. But we also try and cover culture more broadly as well, although we get less traction for doing that, but we chip away, and we're really interested in telling other stories beyond just food and drink.
I've noticed a growing prevalence of those kinds of stories. Is this something that you're consciously trying to push beyond food?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. But when it comes down to it, you eat 3 times a day, you've got 3 opportunities to go out to do that, whereas you're not going to go to a theatre even 3 times a month unless you're really into the theatre. So we have different expectations for the stories we write about other types of culture, I guess, but we really try, and I spend a lot of effort trying to find writers who know a lot about different things beyond food.
Yeah, sure. And Nick, could you give us an overview of Spook?
No problems. Spook is an art-inspired art publication. It's moved towards more of an art-inspired cultural magazine now. We, as Anders said before, we were predominantly a print publication. We started in 2009 in Melbourne, and we grew over the next few years, released 7 or 8 issues, and around the areas of arts, fashion, culture. We did a lot of gonzo journalism, and someone actually compared us to, or a cross between sort of Frankie magazine and Vice magazine, which I thought was an interesting comparison, but we took it on board. So 2013, 2014, we looked at the inevitable and looked at the future of journalism, and we took the route of really going away and rethinking what we were about and so forth. And we relaunched last year spookmagazine.com, and we've been going for just over a year now online. Who reads Spook? I guess, we have a similar audience to, you could say, Junkies audience, or Vice. A lot of them are quite young. The age group is 18 to 35, with that sort of primary focus on about sort of 27, 28, 29, that sort of era, that sort of time, age rather. And I think we've moved a lot more towards sort of opinion-based journalism and editorial, long form features, as well as doing the newsy types of content, the pop cultural content. And I guess people look at us as an alternative to the mainstream press. We certainly have sort of various opinions that you wouldn't see in the Telegraph or whatnot. And yeah, I guess what gives it that youthful vibe is that we're a little bit risque, and we do publish content that other publications may be too worried about to
You
publish.
do have a sex vertical. Is that that's indicative of this?
Well, yeah, that's sort of worked for and against us at certain stages.
Yep.
Advertisers look at us, with a little bit of hesitance when they look at that sort of section and the types of content we're publishing.
Yep.
But it is part of our identity, and I think if we lost that, we would lose something.
Yep.
We certainly see that as a focus of what we're doing at the moment.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
You've all sort of touched on this in your answers to this question. I was wondering if you could talk specifically about how the content for your publications has changed or evolved over time. I know we've ranged from 6 months to a few years, but they're all fairly young publications. Has there been sort of quick, radical change in that period of time? Steph?
Yeah, I think we've kind of recently, maybe over the last year, we were doing a lot more short, fun news pieces, trying to get to videos first and trying to get to like viral clips and whatnot first. And then we realised that we were competing with much larger teams. So when we tried to do those short little news stories, we were never the first to it, and we weren't really adding too much more to it. So we kind of took a step back, and now our staff writers, the writers that we have on staff, are given a bit more of a loose lead. Sometimes they might, instead of producing 3 or 4 things a day, which is crazy, they'll just work for a full day on a big story. And it might not get published till the next day, and we've realised that if we're not going to be first to a story, we can be best at it. Take a little bit more time to work on it and find a different through line than the through line that the rest of the media has tackled it. A lot of the time we do stories that are like, instead of this is what's happened, we might the next day publish something along the lines of this is how the media reacted to what happened, and do a little bit of a meta step back from the news cycle. So.
Cool. Sam?
I think that certainly Pickle has evolved the content that in the way that we used to do it, because we launched that site really wanting to develop kind of a more quirky voice for 9MSN. And whereas there might have been, a more straightforward write-up of a viral video kind of before Pickle launched, now we can kind of add that more, editorial voice to it and be a bit more playful and a bit more fun with it. And I'm certainly finding that as the site goes along, kind of what the audience likes and kind of what they don't like as much, and how they respond to a story being told in a certain way.
Yeah. Could you give us an example of this process?
In terms
of like a piece of content that hasn't really worked or that took off and surprised you.
One that I thought would do well, but kind of got, more of a response than I had anticipated, was a story about koala babies. This is kind of disgusting, so I apologise in advance. Koala babies eat their own mum's poo in order to absorb her, the healthy bacteria in their gut, so they can then go on to eat eucalyptus leaves.
Yeah, right.
And it was just that kind of, it was a little kind of animal factoid that I picked up on a random visit to the zoo. I thought that's really cool. So I'm going to tell that story to 9MSN's audience. And as I said, I thought they would like it because it's a story about an Australian icon. It's a story about disgusting bodily processes. But they really liked it. So I think it's those kinds of just quirky, interesting kinds of things that people like, which is great because I like that kind of thing. I like telling that kind of thing to people.
Yeah, cool. You guys, anything did you want to add to how your content's changed?
Our content's changed completely from moving from print to digital.
Does the print still exist, or has that gone completely?
No, it hasn't gone.
Yep.
We're just planning on... we're looking at doing a yearly issue,
Okay.
which would be the best of the website as well as new content. But that's still in the process. But yeah, totally different. So we went away and came back, and suddenly, everyone was clicking on Upworthy things which were saying, what happens next will totally blow you away. So a little bit confused about how we sit in this sort of marketplace. We have adopted that sort of clickable sort of headline type idea, but we sort of look at it as if you can do a clickbaity title as long as the content's up to scratch. So in terms of headlines, they've changed. In terms of social media and what we publish, the traditional pyramid type of news reporting or reverse pyramid, suddenly you don't want to give everything away in the first paragraph because that's the one that goes up on Facebook. So just structurally, the way you write and structure a piece is different that we've noticed. It certainly has changed. I mean, like, go on forever. Spent a lot of months, with headaches over how we do things to do it, but
interesting. On picking up on this topic, I know a lot of people online like to now say that the age of clickbait is over. Do you think it is, Tim?
No. I mean, clickbait is going to change the way as people get more cynical over the type of headlines that Nick just described. You won't believe what happens next. We all now react in a certain way when we see those sort of headlines, or you see a headline that has a number in it, 6 things you won't believe about X, or 6 ways all your anxieties are going to be put on display for you, and then you're going to be told that you can feel okay about all of them. We're now quite cynical about those sort of headlines, but we still need to find ways to get people to visit our sites without thinking about it. So we're always going to be trying, and when I say we, I mean us guys who work for, and probably a lot of you guys too who write for digital publications, you've got to think about headlines that people will click on without asking them to do any work. Because if your audience has to spend even a second trying to work out what it is the headline is saying and what's in it for them, then they won't put that work in. People just won't click because there's just too much else competing for their attention. So clickbait is, we'll call it something different and the headlines will change, but it's not going away because it can't.
Did you want to add anything to that, Steph, in terms of how junky?
I mean, well, I think it's really interesting, and Upworthy is a really interesting example because I think they've lost a lot of traffic recently. The other thing is, we become more cynical, and that changes what clickable headlines are. But also, Facebook changes its algorithm, and that changes what kind of headlines work. And I think Upworthy got kind of ball busted by Facebook, and they have been trying to reconfigure how to reposition themselves on Facebook and how to resell their articles for Facebook. But they have a really great slideshow, which I always talk about, called How to Make That One Thing Go Viral. And it's from back when they were doing the old style of headline. And in it, they say something along the lines of, you're not writing a headline for your audience, you're writing a headline for your audience's friends. So you're writing a headline that when your audience reads it, which they will because it's their audience, it's your audience, they share it and their friends will want to click on it. And so it's like this extra layer that you've got to go through when you're thinking about framing content that you want to take off on social media. It's not just, telling people what's going to be in the article, but it's trying to have a curiosity gap, trying to make sure that, the word bait itself implies that the prize at the end is not going to be what you expected. You've got to make sure that it's not bait. You've got to make sure that the prize is good enough to make people want to share that article and not embarrass themselves on their social media feeds.
This idea of shareable content leads very nicely into my next question, which is we're here to talk about social media and how you guys use social to push your articles out to your audiences. I was wondering if you could each individually speak about the kinds of social media strategies you have in place and how sophisticated these processes are in your organisations. We'll start with you, Sam.
Yeah, sure. So I think that 9MSN, as I mentioned earlier, is very much about mainstream Australia. So most of our focus is on Facebook because that's just the biggest social network and that's where our audience is. With regards to the sites that I work on, when we relaunched those earlier in the year, they all had the accompanying Facebook, Twitter, Instagram accounts. And again, we've just found that Facebook is obviously the one where we get the most traction. Twitter, we've kind of pulled off a little bit, just purely because we don't, if we're going to focus our resources on a particular network, it's going to be the biggest one that's out there, which is Facebook. That said, we do still do Instagram quite a lot. I think just because Instagram is just glamorous and pretty, and to be cynical, it appeals to advertisers and to PRs.
Yeah, Tim, do you want to elaborate?
As Sam said, everyone is on Facebook. Our audiences are on Facebook, and you've got to fish where the fish are. And in the past year, Facebook has gone from delivering us about 30% of our traffic to half of our traffic. So we'd just be crazy not to spend half our time thinking about what it is that makes what we do work on Facebook. And like Steph, you summed it up really well with your sort of bait analogy. You've got to make sure that what you're delivering people is something that they want. But we, in terms of a strategy, we don't consider anything published until it's been on Facebook. You put the story live, you put it on the homepage or what have you, but you're not actually putting it in front of your audience unless you've gone to your audience. And I think that's the really big difference in the approach of people like us who are sitting on the panel in front of you, and journalists who are maybe 10, 20 or 30 years older than us, who have never had to find their audience. They've always known that their audience will come to them. Their audience will walk into a newsagent and buy a newspaper. We know that is not the case. We know that we have to go, we have to be where our audience is. So we spend an incredible amount of time thinking about how to do that, and looking at what we publish on Facebook, pulling it apart, trying to analyse what worked, what didn't work. Could we have used a stronger photo? Could we have changed the headline to, just to appeal to people on Facebook a little bit more than the headline we published on the site? We probably spend, I was about to say we probably spend too much time thinking about that, but given how much traffic we get from Facebook, it's probably the right amount of time. But that said, you've got to be ready for, you can't put all your eggs in that Facebook basket, because it could go the way of MySpace. It probably won't. It'll probably be here for quite a while, but you need to make sure you've got traffic coming in from other places as well. Is the homepage dead, Nick?
Yes, it is, I would say. Just from our stats for Spook is that, everyone goes directly to the articles because of social media. It's still important to give the publication an identity. I think if we lost the homepage, I think you'll lose something about the brand. So I think when people first go to it, just check it out, whether that's an advertiser or someone new to the publication. It's important to have it's like a book cover. It's not the main part of it, but it's important. So I would say yes, it is. But not totally, but in terms of where it was, 10 years ago, certainly changed.
It has a different purpose, doesn't it?
It certainly does, yeah. And that's changed how advertisers look at as well, and how they integrate with your brand. Like homepage banners aren't what they used to be, and so forth. So, I would say that that you just got to rethink about what the homepage is there for.
Well, all of this is having an impact, as you mentioned, on how we pay for journalism, with the rise of stuff like native advertising and events and going into other spaces. Steph, Junkie Media is really known for pursuing native advertising. Could you talk about how you use that strategy in your organisation?
Sure.
Yeah.
So, they really came out of the gates championing that one, and I think they say that they kind of brought it to Australia, and I think a few other people kind of take a bit of issue with that, but they definitely did strongly champion native advertising as kind of the future of revenue raising for online digital publications.
Could you just, explain what that is?
Okay, so cool. Native advertising is kind of, it's when you click on an article and at the top it says brought to you by X, and X is a brand, and that brand has a brand positioning that it's gone to market with, and that brand positioning might be Innovative Young Australia, and it wants to tie itself to innovative young Australians. And that native piece of content is going to be something that's like an interview with an innovative young Australian. And then down the bottom it says, X brand is championing innovative young Australians. To find out more, click here. And more often than not, that page, the skins of that page have got that advertising. They've got like a social media feed on the side. It's basically better advertorial. Advertorial used to be about 10 best things about Sony's new Walkmans. Sure, Steph. But now instead it's like, 10 pieces of technology from old films that you love. So it's a little bit more of you're telling the story of a brand's positioning rather than directly selling the brand, which means by proxy, like, the piece of content has to be better. It has to fit in with the masthead. It has to be written really well, and it has to be something that the editor is okay to publish and proud to publish. And that's how we approach it. So since we launched Junkie, our publisher used to be called the Sound Alliance, recently renamed to Junkie Media. But since the Sound Alliance launched Junkie, now Native makes up 50% of its revenue. And Native wasn't even an offering in market before we launched. So that just shows how big a deal it is for our company. We still do have banner ads and other revenue models, including events. But Native is it's a pretty big way that we get money.
Yeah, cool. Does 9MSN use native advertising?
Yeah, we do quite a lot of native advertising. They sit, there's the editorial team, which I'm in, and then there's another team which is kind of devoted just to looking after that. And I think that Steph touched on the key point about native, is that it really has to be content that's as good as the content that the editorial team is producing. And in the time that I've been at 9MSN, which is about 2 years now, when I started we didn't do any. Maybe a year ago we did some, but we were kind of nutting out the strategy. It wasn't as good as it is now. I think we've kind of really developed that strategy a lot better.
Yeah. Tim, is it a major role in broadsheets?
Yeah, sure is. Yep, exactly as Steph and Sam said. It's our primary source of revenue, and our audience is more forgiving of it than we, as sort of journalists who aren't from that world, expected, especially me, because I think everyone understands that they're getting broadsheet for free, and Junkie and your site, Sam, all of our sites. You guys aren't. Nobody pays to read our stories anymore. That you don't. So there's got to be a transaction somewhere, and if it's a banner at the bottom of a story, and that story is brought to you by Holden, then okay. I as a reader, I understand that this website has to pay its writers and its staff somehow. But as both Sam and Steph have said, those stories have to work twice as hard as an ordinary story, because you've got two different imperatives. You're trying to put something in front of your audience that they'll be interested in, and then you've got a brand who has all these objectives which more often than not are not things your audience is interested in, and you've got to shoehorn all those objectives into a piece that they will then be happy to pay for, because they can see that that piece embodies the values of whatever their new model car is, or Sony Walkmans. They embody this nostalgic sort of pang for old technology. And what keeps me awake at night is the idea that someone will be reading through a broadsheet story thinking, why is broadsheet publishing this? And then they get to the bottom and see that tagline and go, oh, that's why they're publishing it, because they're paid to. It's really important to us that those stories are interesting in their own right. And it sounds like you guys have put exactly the same amount of thought as we have into making this happen.
You touch on an interesting point that I think people who maybe critique native advertising raise, which is, does it at all lead the editorial direction of your publications in terms of what you're covering? So, for example, Junkie's AWOL is entirely native advertising for Qantas. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You were wrong.
Okay, yeah.
So I think a quarter of AWOL stories are brought to you by Qantas.
Okay.
And the whole brand is a Qantas, basically a Qantas custom publication. But we also have other native advertisers who advertise within AWOL. So there's other stories that are brought to you by other brands.
Yeah, sure.
But the majority is brought to you by someone.
So I'm just wondering, how do you navigate, as editors of publications, the idea of wanting to publish stories that maybe won't bring in the kinds of amazing revenue that native brings? How do you deal with those challenges? Nick?
We offer Yeah, we offer native as part of like package deals as a smaller player than these guys. Yeah, we offer placements of ads, native placements, newsletter placements. So we offer it in a different way. In terms of stepping away from what our editorial policy is, we rarely would that be an issue. We often get brands targeting us who want to be in it for their reason of brand alignment. I mean, we spend a lot of time on sales, so when we do get one, it's normally one that really fits.
Yeah.
So it's a lot different. So it's hasn't really been an issue. So what was the question?
No, I was just wondering how you deal with the desires of brand partners to perhaps change the kinds of content that you yourself as a title are producing.
Yeah, I think as I said, it's
how do you retain your autonomy?
Hasn't really been an issue, but
Yep.
we thought about how we would do it if there was an issue.
Yep.
And one way is to make it really self-aware that we're advertising a product, almost like Graham Kennedy used to do in the 50s and 60s, joke about it. You know, we're selling, Mercedes, and make a bit of a joke about it. I think obviously we'd have to get the consent of the advertiser, but for us, that's sort of what we would do if there was an issue. But we haven't had any major problems so far.
I think an important point to make, which kind of bounces off yours, is that the brand is coming to your outlet for a reason. So if you were going to change what your outlet does to fit more brands, your outlet would change, and the brands might not want to be there because the audience probably wouldn't either. So I think the bigger conflict that comes is when a brand isn't happy with the native piece you've proposed. So all of the native pieces come through for us anyway, they come from our team, and we propose like 5 ideas, and then the brand will pick their favourite, and then we'll go find a writer who writes it up. Sometimes brands fight back a little bit and say, no, we want it more like this. And probably in 90% of those cases, the articles that we end up publishing are rubbish in comparison to what we think that would have done really well. And that can be really challenging and very trying for the editorial team, because we know that the idea we had is going to go well, and then we put this thing on the internet that we're not happy with and that no one really wants to read. That's when it becomes challenging.
I think native will get better as advertisers get more comfortable and they trust
that. Yeah, the best advertisers are the ones that are like, you guys know what you're doing.
Yeah, but because, as you said, Steph, it's so new, and it is very different to advertorial. It's not writing about the product. So there's a lot of reassuring brands. I don't want to say educating brands, because they're like dogs going after a ball. They want the ball. When I say they want the ball, they want you to write about their product. That's what they want. That's what they want. That's what they're paying you for. Write about my product. And as Steph said, a lot of it is just reminding them that you have an audience who comes to, in my case, Broadsheet for very specific things, and it's not going to work for them if we don't deliver those things to our audience and we just write about how great their car is or whatever it happens to be. And we've had countless examples, like Steph said, of instances where we've caved into advertisers and then they've come back and said, well, the campaign was a failure, no one looked at the piece. And we've said, yeah, that's because we did what you wanted. And obviously we're more polite than that because they're paying us. But you have that conversation and hope that they'll come back to you next time and give you a bit more room to write something good, something that doesn't suck.
And I think they're learning, but you're also learning as well, right? Like, you now know which clients are the ones to approach and which ones are going to be more flexible with. We've said no before, which was a very new, interesting experience for our publisher, to say no to advertisers that they knew was just not going to be a good fit.
As a publisher, it's important that you do listen to the needs of the advertiser. We early on we had one of our print issues. We had what you would describe as a native placement for content in one of our articles, and it was very, very loosely based on the brand, and we got it in a bit of trouble. We sat down after the app was printed, and when we got the authority from them, but a higher up person at their organisation sat down and was like, where's the link between this and our brand? And we've sort of learned a lot about that, in terms of communicating with the sponsors. But the trick is that you do have to have a link, and we were a bit naive in terms of being a bit too conscious of selling out, and we took it. So as a publisher, that's also important.
Can I just really quickly say, if you guys are wondering why we're spending so much time talking about this, it's really in your interests, if any of you are writers, to not be cynical about native advertising, because this is how you will earn a living. You know, we don't pay much for editorial stories. We pay $100 a story on broadsheet, which is not going to help you build a career out of being a writer. But if you embrace these sort of challenges as a writer with an open mind, you know, here is a set of objectives a brand has. I want to write something engaging for an audience. How do I synthesize the two? You're always going to be in work if you can do that well. So it's not what you want to do with your life, writing advertorial.
I don't even think that's true. I think that there's ways around it, because some of the pieces we publish on Junkie are like pieces that I'm so thrilled to finally get the budget to publish.
Yeah,
like I love the
exactly.
fact that we get to showcase 20 young, innovative Australians and finally have a big budget to do that. It's awesome. And it means that our writers we pay over triple what we pay for editorial, we pay for native. It means they get to interview someone who's extremely inspiring that we wouldn't be able to justify editorially otherwise. So I almost feel like it's even more, I feel more positive about it.
Yeah.
Because I think some people could find a living and also find a lot of creative fulfillment if they find the right brands and the right outlets.
In terms of, was it? I think you guys did a travel feature earlier this year, and you had 10.
That was with Kentucky, and it was like a 6,000 word long form written by Sam Cooney, who used to be editor of Lifted Brow.
Yep.
Is editor of Lifted Brow, and is like, I'm sure half the people in this room know him or have heard of him. He wrote an excellent piece called Why We Travel, and it was just an investigation into what makes you travel, but it was also a look at a group of young Australians who took a bus around America that they'd refitted out and lived in for a month, I think.
And without the native sponsorship, those pieces would struggle to get an audience.
Like we had that custom built by a tech and design team. It looked beautiful. It was integrative, multimedia, parallax scroll, like all of the big buzzwords. It was great.
How, just moving away from this topic for a moment, you raised multimedia. How important is stuff like video, audio, stuff that's not text, essentially, to your publications? Do you think it's overrated? Do you think people want it?
It's very expensive.
Yep.
From our point of view, the cost benefit of spending money on a written piece versus spending money doing video content, it's a lot more efficient writing feature content rather than video. That's just the way we see it. I guess if you've got more better channels of distribution, then it becomes important. It'd be interesting to...
Yeah, Tim, I know Broadsheet always has galleries of at least 10 or so images on their stories.
Yeah, and being totally honest with myself, though people probably don't read most of our stories, but they definitely look at the pictures, and that's we live and die on the strength of those images, so they're incredibly important to us, and we spend a lot of time sourcing great photographers and working really closely with them to make our images sing and to make those galleries as strong as possible. But on video, if I can keep being honest, just in answer to your question, it doesn't actually matter whether I'm interested in video or not. What matters is that advertisers are interested in it. And if advertisers want video, and right now they do, then we need to really think about ways to incorporate video into our site in a meaningful way. That's what's going to drive video, and that is what's driving video on Broadsheet. It's something, our advertisers are bored with text and stills. They want video. It's the thing right now, so we have to engage with that. Otherwise, we're not going to continue to survive. So the challenge for us is, how do we do that in a way that makes sense for Broadsheet? What is video for us? But we're not going to spend the time thinking about it unless someone's going to pay us to.
Sam?
I would say that video is tremendously important to 9MSN. I certainly know that if people aren't watching video on my sites, my boss is asking me why not, as much as if they weren't clicking on stories and reading them. And that's both from an editorial kind of reason, and, as you mentioned, from a commercial reason. I think you summed it up perfectly. Advertisers want videos, so we do a lot of videos.
And I think, just to contextualise again, while we were talking about videos as well as native, the big push that's happened recently is the push to mobile for readers.
Yeah.
So basically the reason why we're all trying to find new revenue models now is because, I mean, we get about 70 to 80% of our traffic, or maybe it's 70% comes through mobiles to Junkie now, which is crazy. And that means basically that banner ads, which used to be the big driving revenue force for digital outlets, look stupid on mobile. Native advertising tells the story of a brand that looks the same on mobile as a normal story, and video looks great on mobile. So that's the reason why this has become important. We just launched a video team at Junkie Media, which is extremely exciting, and the editorial team is still wrapping its head around exactly the best ways to use it. But video, again, is prioritised hugely on Facebook. So, you know, it's coming from the advertisers, it's coming from the audience, it's also coming from the Facebook algorithm. Everything is pointing in that direction at the moment, so everyone's trying to scramble and catch up.
I'm keen to hear the audience's thoughts in a couple of minutes, so please formulate some questions. But one thing I am interested in is what kind of stories do you think are missing at the moment from online youth-focused media? Are there stories that aren't being told, or stories that maybe you've recently started telling for the first time? Steph?
I think representation is always a big issue, and it's a big, it's something we always look at in our editorial team. We have actually more female writers published on Junkie than male writers, but we have more male readers, which is really interesting, which is really great. I'm super proud of that, and that was not intentional, but we definitely could use more writers of colour, more writers from diverse health and sexuality and gender identities. I think that that's something that's missing from every publication, always.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would certainly agree with that. We were just talking about this the other day, that most of our news team at 9MSN is men. Our managing editor, Emma Chamberlain, obviously is a woman, as you probably would have guessed from her name. She was one who was complaining about it, half tongue-in-cheek, half maybe not so much. As far as the story, I mean, there are definitely stories that we don't tell on 9MSN that we would like to tell. And I think it's just a struggle, certainly for us, to tell those stories to mainstream Australia in a way that is interesting to them. You know, we used to joke a few years ago that if you put the word feminism on the homepage, people would just not click on it.
We have the opposite effect.
Well, it has. There is definitely a noticeable change in that now, and I guess it's just finding a way to kind of tell those stories about, you know, gender politics, racial politics, that kind of thing, in a way that is, I guess, interesting and accessible to, you know, someone's mum or sister sitting at home who's not kind of wouldn't think of themselves as kind of being like a media savvy, or certainly not social media savvy kind of person.
Just to add to what Sam and Steph have said, which I totally agree with, those stories are missing, and it's to our great shame that, you know, we're not representing the entire population as well as we should. I mean, look at us. Everyone in the room, you know, we're pretty white bread, all of us up on stage, and you guys too, and that's a shame, but it is what it is. But what I feel is missing are stories that take time. You know, Steph, you talked about how quickly you guys react, you know, your team reacts, and it's exactly the same as us. We, you know, something new opens in the city and we're scrambling to get a story together. And you won't see any of us dancing on the grave of legacy media. No one wants to see The Age or the Sydney Morning Herald disappear, because they're still the places where you can go to read a story that someone has spent a month or 2 months on. You know, if The Age folds in Melbourne, I don't know who's going to be able to afford the Nick Mackenzie, you know, the Mackenzie and Bakers of the world, the people who are speaking truth to power and holding our governments to account. You know, we just don't have the resources to do that.
Expertise and experience. Like, we have a lot of young writers, which is fantastic, but they don't have the wide angle that they need in order to tell a story about what's happening now and what it means in the broader context of how things happened 10, 20, 30 years ago. So we can't offer that because we can't afford those kinds of writers, but not many places, can anymore.
Yeah, I think there's generally a problem with, I guess, mentorship in the media. I mean, certainly I don't feel like I had a kind of senior editorial figure guiding me through like a lot of older journalists I know had. And that's, as you said, it's just a resource thing. There's just no time to kind of sit down and, you know, take someone under your wing and really kind of beat them into shape. It's so day to day, so fast. And half the time I can't even remember the stories I've written on a particular day because, you know, they're so tied to that day that if you ask me again a few days later, I'm just like, something about a dog, maybe.
Good guess.
Yeah.
We might open things up to the audience now, so if you've got a question, please raise your hand and a microphone will be with you shortly. Yep.
I just wanted to ask about, I think as more journalism has moved online, the discussion has often been around the community and the fact that you can kind of have this two-way feedback loop as opposed to just broadcasting your content. And I was wondering if that's actually a reality now that we're this far into online journalism, or whether it is really just about like, let's just get the content out there. Like, do you guys sort of listen to your audience, or what is that feedback like?
That's a great question, Nick.
For us, that's very important to create that community. You can produce as much fast news as possible and fast, clickbaity content, but in terms of our brand and what we want out of our publication and what sponsors want is engagement. And certainly if you are providing a two-way conversation with your audience, with your writers and with your with the publisher, it certainly creates a lot more depth to what we're offering, and that translates to greater brand awareness, greater brand equity, and so forth. So look, it's more important than what I probably thought of, several years back. In terms of, we want people to stay on our site longer, and having that two-way conversation certainly helps with that. And it's also good to create relationships with people in the community and your writers, because that's all part of being a modern day media outlet online. Otherwise, you become too shallow and people forget about you. So it certainly is.
I'm sure writers older writers than us would have been so excited at the opportunity to get this sort of instant feedback we get now. Because if you're really engaged in making media and you really want to be good at it, you have to care what your audience think about what you're doing, because who else are you doing it for if not your audience? And we've now got just so many tools to find out how our pieces are being read. It's amazing. So of course we read all that, all those comments on Facebook, and all the emails we get. We don't get to respond to as many as we like, but we definitely read it, because it's just so valuable. It's fantastic. It's a hugely valuable resource.
Yeah, and I think it can be quite corrective and really beneficial, especially when we're all working in such short deadlines. Things go wrong, people get stuff wrong, voices aren't included, and then you can have someone on Twitter say, why didn't you get a quote from this person or this community, or you got this fact wrong or this date wrong? That kind of stuff is great. I think the challenge for the editor now is to decide which parts of the audience's feedback they listen to and which parts they ignore. Because if you were just doing only what the audience wanted, I think all of our sites would be pretty rubbish.
That's good life advice for people.
Everyone just wants Justin Bieber and dog videos.
And Kardashians.
Yeah.
Still.
Love dog videos.
What about you, Sam? Do Pickle and Coach have a different relationship to their audience to, say, 9MSN broadly, or not?
Well, I think that there is certainly that element to it, because they focus on more niche kinds of areas. We kind of touched on it earlier, but it's interesting to see what can resonate on social media versus what would resonate on 9MSN's homepage. Because most of the traffic to the 9MSN sites does still come from the 9MSN homepage, as opposed to social media. I think it's about a 70-30% split. And sometimes a story that just bombs on the 9MSN homepage will end up doing quite well on social media, and vice versa. So there are kind of different appetites, I think, in those two different mediums.
Yeah, sure. Have we got more questions?
I'm interested in how much of your working time you spend monitoring the competition, not so much the advertising or the audience, but just what else is happening online that's in your particular kind of domain.
Heaps.
Yeah.
I think I read the entire internet every morning before I even get to work. We're in a really interesting space, which is being done extremely well in the States and is only kind of just starting to burgeon in Australia. So a lot of incredible stories will come up overnight from some of my favourite American sites, and I really love just staying up to date with the kinds of stuff they're doing. I think everyone in the industry is watching each other in terms of financial models as well, in a pretty big way. And monitoring competition, It's a tough one because you don't want to chase them. Like, people can pick it really easily. If you post something an hour after your competition does, it's obvious and terrible. But I think it's important to keep an eye on what everyone else is doing. If anything, just if you want to be writing on the internet, you have to also be reading it.
You've also got to recognise that it's a distraction.
Yeah.
You know, if you're keeping an eye on your competition, you're not doing your own job. So you've got to sort of watch yourself and not get too swept up in what other people are doing. Like, obviously, as Steph said, you've got to be across what else is out there. And we're all in the media because we're interested in it, so we're all reading all the time, but you don't want to spend too much time doing it.
It becomes a lot more efficient when you know, first thing I do in the morning is have a look at my phone, have a look at, and the first thing that comes up is often Facebook or the messages. And because you've clicked on a lot of sites in the past, say Broadsheet or Junkie, or The Guardian or so forth, you check the feed, and because you've clicked on these in the past, it's just all there in front of you. So I often spend about 15 minutes in the morning over my Weet-Bix looking at everyone else's story. So I guess it's not, as you said, you can't spend too much time on it, but I guess the way Facebook does it with their algorithms, you can get it all in one slot.
Especially if you want to have an original take on something, you need to know what isn't original and not replicate it.
Exactly.
Yeah, sure. There was someone in the middle. Yeah.
So I've just got a question about how you use Facebook and social platforms and all that kind of stuff. And I recognise that in answering this question, you might be giving away business secrets. So, like, you can dance around it. But sponsoring posts on Facebook and Twitter seems to be the way that they want to make money. And I was just wondering how much you look at putting money into those platforms, or if you just wing it and sort of see, if you don't pay any money to it, how a post does.
We, at Broadsheet, we haven't spent a cent on Facebook. My publisher has a hunch, and it's probably right, that once you start spending on Facebook, they reduce your organic reach even further because they know they've got you. They're kind of like drug dealers. So, it seems to be working well for us, but often we'll see our competition, you know, maybe Concrete Playground or Urban List will sponsor a post, and the engagement will quintuple anything we've done, and we just cop that because we can go out to advertisers and say our audience is earned. We haven't bought our audience. It's, you know, they're coming to us because they want to. We haven't spent money to, you know, we're not holding up a sign on the side of the road or anything like that. And I think that even though we're missing out on traffic, it's important for us to be able to say that.
We're a little bit addicted to it. We pay a little bit every now and then. We see it as a bit of a growth strategy. Because we're obviously a small player, we want to expand our network. So if you do it well, and if you do it targeted towards certain groups, it has worked, and it hopefully will continue. Obviously, we've got to be careful on how much you spend, because sometimes, with all addictions, it can get worse.
But it does work, doesn't it?
It's certainly great to see the likes go up and everything. But it certainly does work. We'll probably, plateau our expenditure on that. I'm afraid also that we will end up Facebook decreasing our organic reach if we stop spending what we do. So we spend a couple of $100 a week. If we start cutting out to 100, are they going to penalise us? So that's sort of, a lot of that stuff keeps me up at night, to be honest. But look, it's not too much of an addiction, but to answer your question, we do spend a little bit every now and then.
We used to use it when we were starting out as a growth thing, but now we don't use it for editorial. We occasionally use it for native stories when they need a bit more of a boost. And we do use it to advertise our Facebook page, so people like us on Facebook. But I think we're having conversations at the moment about increasing it because we've noticed our competition using it and they seem to be doing very, very nicely off it. And yeah, it's annoying when you're like, oh, this could be getting heaps more attention and it deserves more attention. But yeah, you've got to find other ways in. I mean, Facebook is Facebook is responsible for something, this is outrageous and very scary, but something like 70% of Junkies traffic. So as soon as they pull a plug, we're screwed. Like, we need to find different ways of getting out to audiences, whether it's, you know, video, whether it's newsletters, whether it's different social media platforms. We're kind of in that process right now of trying to wean ourselves off.
I think at 9MSN we have paid sponsored posts, mostly to, again, as you guys said, as a growth strategy. We are in kind of a lucky position in that we do have that network homepage that still drives us a lot of traffic. So I guess the need to put all that into Facebook isn't as great, but you know, we're always looking for alternate sources of traffic. I think whether it be Facebook or kind of a portal homepage, you never kind of want to put all your eggs in one basket, because you don't know, you know, how things will change, how Facebook will change their algorithm, how people will, you know, use the internet in a different way. So Facebook is certainly important, and we have paid for it, and there's always that challenge of actually finding the money to sponsor the posts. I know that sometimes our marketing team is like, hey, here's some money for Facebook, and other times they're like, what money for Facebook?
Those marketing teams.
Yeah, curse them. So yeah.
Cool. We probably have time for one quick question, if anyone's got one. Right down the back.
Oh.
Sorry, this probably doesn't apply for 9MSN, but for the other outlets that have, I guess, leaner teams, who are some other key members of your team that sort of help shape decisions around content, what you do with advertisers, and I guess your strategies online? Like, do you all have SEO experts, or who else is sort of like crucial to your team? Or editorial staff having to do that as well.
We have a Slack channel for our staff, which Slack is like a new instant messaging, it's not that new, but instant messaging group messaging platform. So all of the editors, staff writers of Junkie have their own channel, then all of the editors across the other sites, Junkie Media, publish, which are Faster Louder in the mix. Same, I think at the moment, although we're still kind of working out what's going on with Same. And AWOL, all the editors chat there. We have an in-house tech team who help us a lot with algorithm-y stuff and things I don't understand about how we're charting month to month and day to day and minute to minute. We also have Chartbeat. I don't know if you guys use Chartbeat.
Yeah.
I think everyone kind of uses Chartbeat maybe, which is basically like Google Analytics but live. It shows you second to second. Oh, Google Analytics do it as well, and it's free through them, but I think Chartbeat is more industry standard. It shows you who's on your stories, where they've come from, how long they're staying there. Google Analytics shows you how deep people are scrolling. Like, there's all that kind of information that you can get from different services. So I don't know, do you guys use SEO? We don't really use SEO that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it would make sense to you guys.
But we don't have an SEO expert in-house. We just don't. We're a very small team. There are 12 people who work at Broadsheet across Sydney and Melbourne. There's 2 staff in Melbourne, and 2 staff in Sydney. There's an editor, and just hired at the end of last year an assistant editor, and then in Melbourne we have an editor and an assistant editor. We have 2 developers, and there's a small, very small sales team. We don't have a marketing team. Which we've sort of talked about. We don't market outside of Broadsheet. That's something we should probably get onto. But we all talk. You might have heard of something called the New York Times Innovation Report, which is this really influential sort of soul-searching document that the New York Times put together, trying to work out how to solve all these problems that they had, being smashed by online competitors who were doing the internet better than they were. And they talk a lot about having everyone in the same place. They talk about having technical staff sitting in the newsroom and having advertising staff accessible to everyone. And we try and do that. Everyone's in the same room. You can turn your chair around, you can talk to a developer, or you can talk to one of the sales team. So we all are invested in the success of Broadsheet, if I can be a bit pithy about it.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. Could you join me in thanking our panel this afternoon? Thank you.